Hi, you're on Reddit Confessions, and I need to get this off my chest before I lose my mind. At exactly 6:14 p.m. last night, my phone buzzed with a message that simply read, "Don't wait up." No name, no explanation, but I didn't need either. My wife's handwriting, well, her texting style, has this way of making even 3 words feel like a verdict. I was already setting the table. 2 plates, her favorite wine glass, and the pasta she'd asked me to make in the morning. But those 3 words? They turned the whole scene into something pathetic, like a dinner set for a ghost. I sat there for a while, fork in hand, watching the steam fade from the food, and trying to tell myself she was just working late. But then I saw it. On the kitchen counter, next to her car keys, was a sealed envelope with my name on it. Inside, there was a folded napkin, not a letter, not an apology, just a napkin, with a faint trace of lipstick on the corner and a hotel room key card tucked underneath. No note, no instructions, just that. I swear, for a moment, I thought it was some kind of anniversary surprise. Maybe she'd booked us a night away. But then I noticed the wine cork in the trash, not from the bottle I'd bought, but from a brand I'd never seen before. And 2 glasses had been rinsed and set to dry. 2. The stupidest part? I actually sat there debating whether to go to the hotel, like some desperate game show contestant choosing between the obvious trap and the mystery prize. My chest felt heavy, my hands clammy. All I could think about was whether the keycard meant she wanted me to find her, or wanted me to know she didn't care if I did. And here's the thing, I went. Of course I went. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when that door opened. When the door swung open, the first thing I noticed wasn't her, it was the sound. Laughter. Not just casual amusement, but the kind of laughter people make when they're so comfortable with each other that the rest of the world fades away. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her legs crossed, holding a glass of champagne. And across from her, leaning casually against the wall, was a man I had never seen before. He had that self-assured grin that told me he knew exactly who I was the second our eyes met. She didn't look startled to see me. If anything, she looked mildly inconvenienced, like I'd interrupted a conversation about something as trivial as dinner plans. "Nathan," she said, almost sighing my name. "You weren't supposed to actually come here." I stood frozen, my brain trying to decide whether to speak or turn around and walk out. The stranger took a slow sip from his glass, his gaze locked on me like I was part of the evening's entertainment. I asked the dumbest question possible. Who is he? Not because I didn't know what was happening, but because I desperately wanted her to give me some absurd, plausible explanation I could cling to. She didn't. Instead, she tilted her head, as if weighing whether it was worth answering at all. "Someone who listens to me," she finally said, her voice smooth, deliberate. That single sentence hollowed me out. I realized in that moment she had rehearsed this. Not the words exactly, but the detachment, the control. I stepped inside, the carpet muffling my hesitant footsteps. My hands were trembling, so I shoved them into my pockets, hoping they wouldn't notice. "You left me a key," I said, my voice cracking like I was the one who'd been caught doing something wrong. She shrugged, taking another slow sip of champagne. "I thought you deserved to know," she replied, as if my life wasn't already unraveling right there on that patterned hotel bedspread. The man, tall, dark hair, the kind of smug presence that fills a room without effort, finally spoke. "You've been married, what, 6, 7 years? Maybe it's time you accepted she's not happy." He didn't raise his voice, didn't try to intimidate me physically, but somehow it still felt like he'd shoved me backwards. My mouth opened, but no words came out. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Marlene looked at me like she was waiting for me to explode, but I didn't. I just stood there, absorbing every humiliating detail. The way she was leaning toward him, the way his hand rested lightly on the bedpost, the faint trace of that same unfamiliar cologne I'd smelled when she came home late last week. My chest felt tight, my knees weak, but I kept standing, because walking out right then would have felt like surrender. Then she said something that made my stomach twist. "You can stay, if you want to watch." Not in a cruel, screaming way, but calm, almost casual, like she was offering me a drink. I felt my throat close up, my vision blur for a second. I managed to shake my head and take a step back, but I didn't leave. I just stood there, trying to figure out which was worse, leaving with no answers or staying and destroying whatever was left of my dignity. That night was the first time I realized my marriage wasn't just broken. It had been dismantled piece by piece while I was too busy trying to be the easygoing, understanding husband. And standing in that hotel room, I understood something else. Whatever came next wasn't going to be simple, and I wasn't ready for how far it was going to go. I don't remember leaving the hotel room. I remember the hallway carpet, burgundy with some swirling gold pattern, and the muffled sound of my own footsteps, but not the act of opening the door. My mind was so loud it drowned everything else out. By the time I got to my car, my hands were shaking so badly that I fumbled the keys twice before getting them into the ignition. I sat there with the engine running, staring at the glow of the hotel sign in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in my life, I didn't know if I wanted to go home. Home wasn't a safe place anymore. It was a crime scene where every object felt like evidence of something I hadn't seen happen but knew had. On the drive back, my phone buzzed. It was her. One message: "Don't make this bigger than it is." That line hit me harder than anything she'd said in person. Bigger than it is? I'd just walked into a room where my wife sat with another man, drinking champagne in a hotel she clearly hadn't booked for me. How much bigger did it need to be? My first instinct was to call her and demand answers, but deep down, I knew that conversation would only make me feel worse. She had this way of twisting words until I was the one apologizing, until somehow my feelings became the real problem. When I pulled into our driveway, the house looked the same, porch light on, curtains drawn, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. I stepped inside and was hit with that same unfamiliar cologne I'd smelled earlier, faint but undeniable. Her shoes were by the door, her coat hanging neatly on the rack. In the kitchen, the wine glasses I'd noticed before were gone from the drying rack. The counters were spotless, like someone had made an effort to erase the evidence. I wandered into the living room and just stood there, staring at the framed photo of us from our wedding day. We looked so young, so sure of ourselves. I'd convinced myself that if we ever faced a rough patch, we'd work through it. That's what you're supposed to do. But this wasn't a rough patch. This was her making a conscious decision to walk away from everything we'd built and daring me to challenge her about it. The sound of the bedroom door opening snapped me out of my thoughts. She stepped out in sweatpants and a t-shirt, looking like she'd just woken from a nap, as if the last 2 hours hadn't happened. "You're back early," she said, her voice neutral, her eyes scanning my face for signs of a fight. I wanted to confront her, to demand why she'd left me that key, why she thought this was something I could just shrug off. But instead, the words caught in my throat, and all I managed to say was, "Why?" She didn't answer. She just walked past me into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. "You overthink everything, Nathan," she said finally, sipping slowly. "Maybe if you stopped clinging so hard, I'd actually want to be here more." That was it. No explanation, no apology, just a subtle hint that my loyalty, my care, my effort were somehow the problem. That night, I lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling while she slept. My mind kept replaying the look on her face in that hotel room, the smug ease of the man she was with, and the way she'd handed me the truth like it was something I should be able to swallow without choking. I knew, in that moment, that nothing about our marriage was accidental anymore. Every decision she made was deliberate, and whatever she had planned next was going to make this night look tame. The next morning felt like waking up in a stranger's house, even though I'd lived there for years. Marlene was already up, humming softly in the kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee drifting down the hall. It almost felt normal, until I walked in and saw 2 mugs on the counter. One was hers, the other, definitely not. It wasn't one of ours. This one had a chipped rim and a faded logo from a construction company I'd never heard of. She noticed me looking and said, without missing a beat, "Oh, I found that in the cabinet. Must have been yours from before we got married." I knew she was lying. I'd unpacked every box when we moved in, and I'd never seen that mug before. But I said nothing, because I was too tired to start the day with another fight I'd inevitably lose. She slid a cup toward me and asked, "So, what's your plan for today?" The question was simple, but the way she asked it felt loaded, like she was taking inventory of my movements. I told her I had errands to run, though the truth was I had no real plan beyond putting distance between us for a few hours. As I grabbed my keys, she called after me, "Oh, and Nathan, don't do anything stupid." The words echoed in my head as I left. Not because I thought she meant them in a protective way, but because they sounded like a warning. I ended up at a small diner on the other side of town, the kind of place where the waitresses know everyone by name. I ordered coffee I didn't really want and sat in a booth by the window, staring at my phone. That's when a text came through from an unknown number. You deserved better. She's not hiding anything anymore. Attached was a grainy photo. My wife, sitting at a table in what looked like a crowded bar, the same man from the hotel beside her, his arm draped casually over her chair. My pulse shot through the roof. Whoever sent it had a block number, so I couldn't reply. The photo had been taken less than an hour earlier. I realized she must have left the house before I even got up, which meant that Hole found the mug in the cabinet act was just her way of covering her tracks. My hands trembled as I thought about driving straight there, confronting them both in public. But then I imagined her face, calm and cold, telling me once again that I was overreacting. And worse, I imagined the people around us looking at me with that mix of pity and embarrassment. When I got home later that afternoon, her car was in the driveway. She was in the living room, casually scrolling through her phone like she'd been there all day. No mention of where she'd been, no explanation for the mug, nothing. It was like she was daring me to bring it up, knowing full well that I probably wouldn't. I told myself I'd wait, gather more proof before I said anything. But deep down I knew the truth. I wasn't waiting for evidence. I was waiting for her to care. That night, as she fell asleep beside me, I made a silent promise to myself. I would find out who sent that message, and I would find out why they cared enough to warn me when my own wife didn't. And I had no idea that the answer would lead me into something much darker than just infidelity. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the image from that grainy photo came back to me. Marlene leaning toward that man, her body language so open, so natural with him. Like he was the one she'd been married to all these years, and I was just a placeholder. By morning, I convinced myself that whoever sent that message was the only person who could help me see the full picture. I needed to know what they knew, even if it hurt. Around 9 a.m., while Marlene was still in bed pretending to scroll through her phone with that unreadable expression she always wore in the mornings, I slipped outside and called a friend of mine, Pete. He works in IT and owes me a favor from years back when I covered for him at work. I told him I had a block number that I needed to trace. He didn't ask questions. Maybe he could hear in my voice that I wasn't up for small talk, and said he'd call me back within the hour. When my phone rang, Pete's voice was quieter than usual. Nathan, you're not gonna like this. The number belongs to a prepaid burner phone. But the person who bought it? I checked the store's security footage. You know them. My stomach dropped. Who? I asked, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles ached. There was a pause before he said it. Your neighbor. Adam. Adam. The same neighbor who'd sent me that blurry restaurant photo the night she first disappeared. The same man who always waved when I got the mail, who'd fixed our fence last summer without asking for payment. I didn't understand why he'd be involved, unless he was just some kind of good Samaritan who hated what she was doing. Still, the fact that he hadn't just come to me directly made me uneasy. That afternoon, I decided to confront him. I walked over, knocked on his door, and after a moment he appeared, wearing that same easy smile he always had. Hey, Nathan, he said like nothing was unusual. I didn't bother with pleasantries. Why are you sending me photos of my wife? His expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed just slightly, a flicker I might have missed if I hadn't been watching so closely. Because you're not seeing what's right in front of you, he said calmly. And because you need to know she's not just cheating on you. She's in over her head. I asked him what that meant, but he just stepped aside and told me to come in. Inside, he pulled out a folder from under his coffee table and laid it on the couch. Inside were more photos of Marlene, different locations, different men, some taken in daylight, others at night. In some of them, she was laughing. In others she looked tense, like she was in the middle of an argument. But there was one detail that made my skin crawl. In several of the pictures, the same man from the hotel was present, and so was another, older man in a suit, always lingering in the background. Adam said quietly, that man? He's not her boyfriend. He's dangerous. And if you don't start listening, you're going to find yourself in the middle of something you can't walk away from. My first instinct was to tell him he was being dramatic, but there was something in his voice, a sharp edge I'd never heard before, that told me he believed every word. When I left his house, I noticed Marlene's car was gone. And for the first time, I wasn't wondering who she was with. I was wondering what exactly she'd gotten herself into, and whether I'd been dragged into it too without even realizing. By the time Marlene came home that evening, my head was pounding from replaying Adam's words over and over. She walked in like nothing was wrong, carrying a shopping bag and humming some tune I didn't recognize. There was no trace of guilt in her eyes, no nervous energy, just that casual, almost smug calm that made me feel like I was the one sneaking around instead of her. I wanted to confront her right there, to demand an explanation about the man in the suit, but my gut told me to keep quiet and let her keep thinking I was in the dark. While she was in the shower, I slipped into her purse. I hated myself for it, but curiosity and fear had me by the throat. Among the usual clutter, receipts, lipstick, loose change, there was an envelope with a wad of cash, at least a few $1,000s, and a small black notebook. I flipped it open, expecting to see shopping lists or random notes, but instead, each page had a date, a time, and an address written in her neat handwriting. Some of the entries had single words next to them: meeting, delivery, pickup. None of it made sense to me, but one address stood out. It was less than a mile from our house, scheduled for the very next night. I put everything back before she came out, my heart racing so hard I thought she'd hear it. The rest of the evening, I played my role, asking about her shopping trip, listening to her talk about nothing in particular, but my mind was already made up. Tomorrow night, I was going to that address. The following evening, I told her I'd be working late. She barely acknowledged it, too busy getting ready to leave. I waited until she pulled out of the driveway, then grabbed my coat and followed in my car, hanging back far enough that she wouldn't notice. She drove to an industrial area, the kind of place that looked abandoned after dark. She parked behind a dimly lit warehouse and went inside through a side door. I sat there in the car, gripping the steering wheel, debating whether to follow her in. That's when another vehicle pulled up, a black SUV with tinted windows. Two men got out. One was the guy from the hotel. The other was the man in the suit from Adam's photos. Even from a distance, I could see the way he carried himself, confident and cold, like someone used to being in control. They went inside without even knocking. 15 minutes passed before Marlene came out. She wasn't alone. The suited man was right behind her, and he put a hand on her shoulder as they spoke in low voices I couldn't hear. Then she glanced over her shoulder, and for one terrifying second, her eyes locked directly with mine. She didn't flinch, didn't call me out, just gave the smallest, coldest smile before turning back and walking away with him. I don't know how long I sat there after they disappeared, but by the time I got home, my hands were stiff from gripping the wheel so tightly. That smile, it wasn't the look of someone who'd been caught. It was the look of someone who wanted me to know I was already too late. The next morning, I woke to find Marlene already gone. No note, no text, just her side of the bed cold and the faint scent of that same expensive perfume lingering in the room. I stumbled into the kitchen, still replaying the moment her eyes met mine outside the warehouse. That wasn't an accident. She knew I was there. She wanted me to see her with him. The question was, why? I didn't have long to think about it. Around 10 a.m., there was a knock at my door. It wasn't Adam. It wasn't even someone I recognized. A man in his 40s, clean-shaven, wearing a plain gray jacket and black gloves, stood there holding a small padded envelope. "For you," he said simply, handing it over before walking back to a silver sedan idling at the curb. By the time I stepped outside to ask who he was, the car was gone. Inside the envelope was a flash drive and a folded sheet of paper. The note said only, "Watch it, then decide who you're really married to." My heart was pounding so hard I had to sit down before plugging it into my laptop. The file was a single video, grainy but clear enough to make me feel sick. It was inside the same warehouse I'd seen the night before. Marlene was standing at a table with the man in the suit, stacks of cash spread out in front of them. She wasn't just there by accident, she was counting it. And next to the cash, in small padded cases, were what looked like rare watches, jewelry, and other things I couldn't quite identify. In the background, the man from the hotel was talking to someone off camera, his voice low but urgent. Every now and then, Marlene would glance up at him, and there was no mistaking it. This wasn't a fling. This was business. And from the way she moved, the ease with which she handled those stacks of bills, it wasn't her first time. I sat there staring at the paused frame of her smiling at the suited man, the room spinning around me. Adam's warning suddenly made sense. This wasn't about infidelity. She was tied to people who didn't just cheat. They operated in a world where you didn't get second chances. I didn't know who had sent me the video, but I knew one thing. They wanted me involved now. The moment I'd watched it, I wasn't just a husband with a broken marriage anymore. I was a witness. And if these people found out I had this, I doubted they'd care about the difference. As I sat there trying to decide my next move, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Marlene. Dinner at 7. Don't be late. No smiley face, no explanation, just a time. I couldn't tell if it was an invitation or a summons. I almost didn't go to that dinner. Part of me thought it was a trap, that walking into whatever she had planned would be the end of me. But something in me snapped that day, not in anger, but in clarity. I was done being the one who tiptoed around her moods, done letting her write the story while I stood on the sidelines. If I was going to end this, I was going to do it on my terms. The restaurant was upscale, the kind of place where every glass gleamed and every laugh was just a little too polite. Marlene was already there, sitting at a corner table, wearing a black dress I'd never seen before. She smiled when she saw me, but it wasn't her usual smug smirk. This one was almost genuine. I sat down, and before she could start her usual vague explanations, I slid the envelope with the flash drive across the table. Her eyes flickered, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something that looked like fear. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice low. I didn't answer directly, just told her I knew enough to understand she wasn't just cheating. I told her I wasn't going to the police yet, but I also told her I was done, that I'd already spoken to an attorney, that our accounts were separated, and that I'd be gone from the house by the end of the week. She didn't argue. She didn't try to guilt me. She just nodded slowly, like she knew the game was over. We ate in near silence, the air between us heavy but strangely calm. When the check came, she reached for it, but I stopped her. "This one's on me," I said, and it wasn't about the bill. It was about taking back control. 2 weeks later, I was in a small apartment across town. My things were unpacked, the sun poured through the windows, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. Adam stopped by one evening with takeout, and we sat on my balcony watching the city lights. He told me, without going into details, that Marlene had stepped back from whatever business she was in. I didn't need to know more. She was out of my life, and that was enough. The strange thing? I wasn't angry anymore. I felt free, not just from her, but from the constant guessing, the walking on eggshells, the quiet fear that my marriage was a ticking clock. I'd wasted too much time trying to hold on to something that was already gone, but in losing her, I'd found the version of myself I thought I'd lost years ago. So, yeah, this isn't the ending I expected, but it's the one I needed. I'm not broken. I'm not even bitter. I'm just done, and I'm okay with that. What about you? Have you ever been in a situation where the ending wasn't what you wanted, but turned out to be exactly what you needed? Share it in the comments. I read them all. Thanks for watching, and don't forget, you're on Reddit Confessions.